The Enchanted Well. Once upon a time, in a quiet little village, there lived a humble farmer named Edward and his wife, Margaret. They owned a small piece of land where they grew vegetables and raised a few chickens. Though their lives were simple, Edward often wished for more prosperity. He dreamed of having a bigger farm, more animals, and a comfortable home for himself and Margaret. One day, after a long morning of working in the fields, Edward wiped the sweat from his brow and sighed. "If only we had better soil, more rain and stronger animals, we could be wealthier." Margaret, who was kneeling beside a basket of freshly picked carrots, smiled and shook her head. "Be grateful for what we have, dear. Hard work will always provide." That evening, as Edward went to fetch water from the well at the edge of their land, he noticed something unusual. The old moss-covered well glowed faintly in the moonlight. As he peered down, he heard a gentle voice echo from below. "Kind farmer, you have worked tirelessly all your life. Because of your good heart, I shall grant you 3 wishes." Edward stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "3 wishes," he muttered. "This must be a trick." "No trick," the voice replied. "Simply make your wishes wisely." Edward, unsure if he was dreaming, quickly filled his bucket and hurried home to tell Margaret. When he burst through the door, Margaret was mending a torn apron. "Margaret!" he exclaimed, "the well spoke to me. It promised 3 wishes." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You must be tired, dear. Wells don't talk." "But this one did. We can wish for anything we desire." Margaret sighed. "If this is true, then we must be very careful with our wishes." Edward nodded eagerly, but as he sat down at the table, his stomach rumbled. He looked at the plain vegetable stew Margaret had prepared and frowned. "I wish we had a feast fit for a king instead of this dull soup." Before Margaret could protest, a magnificent spread of roasted meats, fresh bread, golden pies, and fruits appeared on the table. Margaret gasped. "Edward, that was one of our wishes." Edward's excitement turned to regret. "Oh, I wasn't thinking. I was just hungry." Margaret groaned. "Well, we might as well enjoy it. But let's be smarter about the next 2 wishes." That night, they ate until they could eat no more. Margaret carefully packed the leftovers, and they went to bed full but frustrated at the wasted wish. The next morning, as Edward stepped outside, he noticed their old, scrappy donkey, Patch, chewing on the laundry Margaret had left to dry. "That wretched beast is always causing trouble. I wish he would turn into a noble stallion instead." A sudden flash of light engulfed Patch. When it faded, standing in the donkey's place was a stunning white stallion with a flowing mane and proud stance. Edward gasped. It worked! Margaret ran outside and nearly dropped her basket. "Edward, you foolish man! That was our 2nd wish. We could have wished for gold or land." Edward scratched his head. "But look at him. He's magnificent." Margaret put her hands on her hips. "We don't even have a saddle for a stallion. He's too big for plowing." Edward groaned. All right, all right. We still have 1 wish left. We must be careful." That night, Edward and Margaret sat by the fire, deep in thought. "We should wish for a large farm with rich soil and strong animals," Margaret suggested. "Or perhaps a chest full of gold," Edward added. As they debated, Edward reached for a candle, but in his clumsiness he knocked it over. The flame caught onto the edge of the tablecloth, and the fire quickly spread. Margaret screamed, "Quick, throw water on it!" Edward panicked. "I wish the fire would stop!" Poof! The fire vanished in an instant, but so did their last wish. For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Margaret sighed. "Well, at least our house is safe." Edward buried his face in his hands. "We wasted all our wishes." Margaret patted his shoulder. "Not completely. We had a fine feast, we have a noble stallion, and we didn't lose our home. We are still better off than before." Edward slowly smiled. "I suppose you're right." And so, though they did not become the richest farmers in the land, Edward and Margaret learned to be grateful for what they had. They kept the noble stallion, who became the fastest horse in the village, and they continued their humble but happy life together, without the help of any more magical wishes. Vocabulary from the story. Prosperity meaning the state of being successful or wealthy. Example: Edward dreamed of prosperity, hoping to own a bigger farm and more animals. Disbelief meaning a feeling of not believing something to be true. Example: Edward stumbled back in disbelief when the well spoke to him. Magnificent meaning extremely beautiful or impressive. Example: a magnificent feast appeared on the table, filled with roasted meats and golden pies. Frustrated meaning feeling annoyed or upset due to failure or difficulty. Example: Edward and Margaret were frustrated after wasting 2 of their wishes. Vanished meaning disappeared suddenly. Example: as soon as Edward made his final wish, the fire vanished instantly. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.